Now, therefore, I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, pursuant to the pardon power conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, have granted, and by these presents do grant, a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon for all offenses against the United States.
President Gerald Ford, a month after he took office, September 1974, announcing a full and unconditional pardon for the previous president of the United States, Richard Nixon, for his offenses against the United States. What Ford did there, that was a preemptive pardon. No charges had been brought against President Nixon. So what Ford did was name Nixon's actions as offenses against the United States. But then he basically said that the person who committed those offenses would be allowed to get away with them without prosecution. Gerald Ford basically said he did it. But because it wouldn't be good for the country if Nixon were prosecuted for what he did, he won't be prosecuted.
My conscience tells me that only I, as president, have the constitutional power to firmly shut and seal this book. My conscience tells me it is my duty not merely to proclaim domestic tranquility, but to use every means that I have to ensure it.
Pardon is not a denial that crimes were committed. A pardon is implicitly an acknowledgement that crimes were committed, even as the person is going to be allowed to escape formal judgment for having committed those crimes. In 1977, in his first full day in office, it was President Jimmy Carter who issued a blanket pardon to men who had dodged the draft to avoid serving in Vietnam. Jimmy Carter didn't say that evading the draft wasn't a crime. He said it would be in the nation's interest if men who committed that crime would not be prosecuted for it. And so they won't. A blanket pardon for more than 200,000 Americans who'd violated the Military Selective Service Act. In 1974, it was Nixon doing the pardoning. 1974, Nixon pardoned William Calley, who'd been convicted of murder for his role in the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. At Christmas in 1992, Poppy Bush pardoned all the high-level officials criminally implicated in the Reagan administration's Iran-Contra scandal. And sometimes pardons are to protest the perceived unjustness of the law under which somebody was convicted. So after Prohibition ended, FDR pardoned a man convicted under the Prohibition laws. JFK pardoned everyone who was convicted under a drug law that he didn't like. Presidents have occasionally issued pardons because they didn't think a real crime had been committed. But more often, people are pardoned because a real crime was committed. Because. The head of the National American Civil Liberties Union has just made a bit of a modest proposal in the case of torture. In the case of torture authorized by and carried out by the George W. Bush administration, torture documented in exquisite detail by the Senate Intelligence Committee today. In the case of torture, Anthony Romero, the executive director of the ACLU, now proposes that George W. Bush and other high-ranking officials of the Bush administration should be pardoned. They should be pardoned for crimes related to torture, authorizing and overseeing torture. And they should be pardoned because torture is a crime. And it ought to be seen as a crime. And as long as it is documented and admitted to openly in this country, but nobody gets prosecuted for it, well, that weakens the sense in which realistically it is illegal. If nobody's going to prosecute these guys for torture, then at least pardon them. So America is on the record naming what they did as criminal. Joining us now for the interview is Anthony Romero, Executive Director of the ACLU. Mr. Romero, thank you very much for your time tonight. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Rachel. It's great to see you. Great to be with you.
Was that a fair, basic summary of the argument that you're making?
Yeah, absolutely. But let's step back. And I want to join you in the sadness that I saw in your eyes and the way you spoke just before. What a terrible day for America. I mean, we see this report in 500-plus pages, spent millions of dollars, 6,000 pages long, that detail in excruciating detail just how we betrayed our most fundamental values, that who we are as Americans were betrayed by the highest levels of our government and carried out by low-level government officials. And the idea that we have purposefully and consciously engaged in torture is truly something that should make every American shudder. And the thing that I find so depressing, now watching the news play out all day, is just how these individuals who are involved in the torture programs are unrepentant. They continue to say, we did the right thing. It was moral. It was legal. It was effective. They have no sense of remorse, no sense of how much they've betrayed who we are as a people. And so it's with great sadness that we're here today. It's remarkable to me.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you there, and I'm doing it sort of out of passion, I have to admit.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
I have been feeling that exact same thing today, and the thing that I am very worried about is that we've gotten to a point now where we have named it, and we have attempted to shame it. As a way of deflecting the shame for it, we've actually made it more likely that as a country we're going to do this more.
Absolutely.
Because now there is this record of praise for torture and saying that it's wise.
Absolutely. And our president is mumbling. Let's be very clear. When he says it was torture in my mind, well, it's a torture in the legal books. If crimes didn't just happen, it was almost like we talk about crimes, but we don't talk about criminals. The idea that there's no accountability for people who broke the law. Now, the president may very well decide it's not worth the political fallout. I happen to disagree with him. I prefer prosecutions. I said that to him the only time I ever met the president in a small room. I said, please hunt one head, sir. Hunt it famously if you want to make sure this never happens again. He decided otherwise. He's the president. Now the question is that if he's watching the clips, he cannot believe that he's closed the Pandora's box of torture. It's up for grabs again.
Yeah. Whenever
we have another terrorist attack, whenever we have another debate, whenever we have another Rick Perry in the White House or Governor Chris Christie, they're going to resurrect these arguments all over again because no one's been held accountable, no one's been charged with crimes. We have the Senate report that doesn't really point fingers at anyone specifically. And so lamentably, I've come to the point, well, if you're not going to prosecute them, label them as criminals and pardon them. Emblazon this big letter C on their chests, which they refuse to wear. But label them as criminals and tell them that, I pardon you. It's better for the country. We're going to move on. But what you did was wrong, unlawful, un-American, unhelpful, and never again to be repeated. Because if you repeat it again, the future perpetrators of torture and the future architects of torture will be held accountable. And this president cannot believe that he's finished the job. This Pandora's box is wide open, and the reason why it's wide open because he refused to take the necessary steps to make this country grapple with the fact that it wasn't just a bad decision or a couple of rogue soldiers. It was unlawful, unconstitutional, illegal, barbaric practices of individuals who dare offend our conscience and tell us that they did right by us. Come on, we know better.
Anthony Romero, Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, the National ACLU. Mr. Romero, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Rachel.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Nice to see
you.
All right, lots going on in the news today, including a lot of stuff totally unrelated to the torture report. Stay with us. We'll be right back.